Shalom again. This is the second of a series dealing with the children of Israel and how we came to be slaves in America. Our first series was Images of the True Israelites. In that you saw how different nations pictured the children of Israel. There's a law in the Torah that states, "You shall not make images of anything that is in the heavens above, in the earth beneath, or in the waters under the earth." Therefore, there are no surviving images of Israelites drawn or sculptured by Israelites themselves. The images that we saw in part 1 are images of the Israelites as depicted by the Egyptians, images of Israelites as depicted by the Assyrians, and images of the children of Israel as depicted by the Babylonians. In this, the second part of a 3-part series, we're going to be examining the children of Israel in their dispersion in Africa. The children of Israel, because they did not follow the laws of the Most High, were dispersed in all directions from their homeland. What we're going to do in this series is examine their Israelites in Africa, their migrations. Let's begin with some history, old history. In Ethiopia, 955 years before the Common Era, or before Jesus Christ, Menelik, son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, established an Israelite dynasty that lasted almost 3,000 years. This was long before the captivity, long before we were expelled. To understand that story, you would have to go back and read about how the Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon, and when she went home, she took more than what she came with. She took a son by Solomon, his name Menelik. He became the first Hebrew king of what's now called Ethiopia. And this is 955 years before the Common Era. Our second stop, Elephantine in Egypt. This was during the captivity of the children of Israel. They were refugees. The main people coming into Elephantine were from the northern kingdom because they had a pact with the Egyptians. And even though the prophet says, do not depend on these Egyptians, they depended on them anyway, had pacts with them anyway. And when the Assyrians came down to conquer them, those who could fled to Elephantine. This was 600 years before the Common Era. Israelites established a garrison, but in 70 CE, the Romans conquered and enslaved over 100,000 Israelites. Our next stop is Cyrene. This is 125 years before the Common Era. The Israelites attempt to establish a Hebrew African empire. Roman suppression forces further Israelite migrations into Africa. It's like the Almighty said, that your foot would find no rest. You will be slaves and refugees, homeless, because you did not follow the laws that I gave you to follow and the laws that you swore you would obey. So now we're coming into a time when the children of Israel, those who were displaced into Africa, tried to establish garrisons, tried to establish communities, but the wrath of the Most High is still on them, and they are continually forced to go further and further into the interiors of Africa. Our next stop is Tamentit. This is in the Sahara before the Sahara became a desert. There are places in the Sahara that shows that people were living there with substantial communities that all become desolate. This is one of the places, Tamentit, in 1492 of the Common Era, the Ottoman Muslims destroyed a 1,000-year-old Hebrew settlement. In this area here, for 1,000 years, the Hebrews thought that they had a safe haven, and they did for quite a long time. However, during the time of the Ottoman Muslims, that community was totally destroyed. 1492 happens to be the same year that Christopher Columbus discovered the so-called New World. Our next stop is Uganda. A line of 33 kings tracing their lineage to King David. This is a Uganda tradition. So it would seem that from Ethiopia to this area in Uganda, during a period of approximately another 800, 900 years, the sons of King David, Menelik and his descendants, also established a kingship even in those regions. It's important to note that during this time, the Sahara was not a desert. The Sahara was a wilderness. According to the prophecy, wherever we would go, the earth itself would not yield. The earth would turn to dust. The sky would not give rain wherever we would go. It is said that the children of Israel turned the Sahara from a wilderness into a desert as part of the curse for not following the laws that they swore they would follow by the hand of the Most High. Let's go to Libya in northern Africa. This is 640 of the Common Era. Israelite Queen Dia Kahina organizes an army to defend against Roman and Arab incursions into North Africa. This is 640. This is at the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Islamic Empire. The Romans were coming from the north. The Arabs were coming from the east. The Romans were pushing Christianity. The Arabs were pushing Islam. These Hebrews were caught between the old Roman Empire and the new Islamic Empire, and they were pushed further west and further south out of their strongholds that they had established. Just for a note, historical note, the name Africa comes from this province in Libya. It was the province of Cyprius Africanus, who was the governor under the Roman rule of that particular area. As time went on and as history went on, this whole continent became known as Africa based on the Roman governor, Cyprius Africanus, and now the whole continent is called Africa, whereas in the beginning it was just this one province in the north. So, just to remind you, all of you who are so proud of your African ancestry, just remember that that name Africa itself is based on the name of a Roman general. So let's go forward. Our next stop, Marrakesh. It's in the modern province of what's called Morocco. From 1000 CE to 1500 CE, the Hebrews were allowed to practice the Torah during the Islamic period. There was an uneasy peace between the Arabs and the Hebrews, the children of Israel, in this particular area, which became an area of high learning. And it became an area of high scientific and political and financial influence. It is from this area that the Moors, so-called Moroccans or Moors, launched their campaigns into Spain. During this period, there was relative peace between those who practiced Torah of the children of Israel and those who practiced Islam of the Arabs and those who came into Arab influence. Just another historical note, when the Honorable Noble Drew Ali went back to Africa to find our African roots, he ended up in this area of Morocco, in Marrakesh. And a lot of what he saw there as far as customs and practices, he took from the Hebrews that were living there, because these Hebrews looked just like him. He was an Israelite. And these Hebrews were Israelites, not Arabs, which he could not identify with, and not Hamitic Africans, which he also could not identify with. He identified with the Hebrews and brought back such things as the fact that we are Asiatic, and the fact that we are, and the fact that our culture, including a very particular and very peculiar type of head wrap, which we will see in the series coming up. Our next stop is Tangiers. (1,150 years of the Common Era), an Israelite sanctuary established by Bnei Musa, which means the sons of Moses. This is another sanctuary, this is another sacred place that even during the times of the Islamic period, the children of Israel were able to hold on and maintain some semblance of their culture. And just like the Almighty said, if you do my laws, I will bless you. If you do not, I will curse you. This was during the time when the children of Israel in Africa were trying to bring back some of their laws, some of their statutes, some of their commandments, and live by them, which is why they were allowed to live in relative peace. Our next stop is Camnuria. a medieval Hebrew state north of the Senegal River. As you can see, our migrations are taking us further and further west along the northern tip of so-called Africa. Our next stop is Ghana. This goes all the way back to 300 CE. A Hebrew dynasty established by Za el-Yemeni lasts about 1,000 years, finally known as the Songhai Empire. You can do some research on the Songhai Empire, and you will find out that it was quite powerful. But it was a blend of Islam and Israelite influence. And it lasted 1,000 years. Our next stop is Lam Lam. It said that they had a 12th century Hebrew kingdom 200 miles east of Timbuktu, also known as Al-Idrisi. Our next stop is Kanzibe. 1831. Shemitic Africans whose kings wear the mitre head wrap resembling that of the Israelite high priest. Now let me show you exactly what this expedition in 1831 actually saw. At the center is the high priest. And this is long before any type of outside European influence had entered into the continent. This was long before Christianity had any kind of foothold in the continent, modern Christianity. This is long before modern books, modern writings had been introduced to these indigenous people. They discovered these people in 1831, and they discovered that they wore the turban, the mitred kippah, and they wore the breastplate exactly like that which is described to be worn by the high priest of the children of Israel. Our next point of reference is on the Niger River. Just above the tribal territories of the Ashanti and the Yoruba. Circa 1850 of the present era, 7 princes descending from the kings of the ancient Israelites. This is the Patasi tradition. It should be noted that the name Ashanti is actually a transcription of one of the Levitical cities, Ashan, that is mentioned in the Old Testament. It was a Levitical city, and it is believed that the people who call themselves Ashanti, meaning of Ashan, are also of the ancient Israelite seed. This is our final reference point, but know for surety that the children of Israel were displaced all throughout the continent known as Africa. Even down into the most southern parts, there is a mixture of Israelites and Hamitic peoples called the Limba, who trace their roots also to ancient Israel. The Israelites of Ethiopia, of the descendancy that produced Haile Selassie, is well established as being in Africa for thousands of years. I'm concentrating on the western part and the northern part of Africa for historical reasons because it relates to us in America. Now let's take a look at some images of the children of Israel in Africa in a more modern setting. Now many people believe that the tradition or style of wearing your hair in locks is a Jamaican tradition. That's not true. Also, that the style is an African tradition is not true. The style of wearing your hair in locks is actually an ancient Hebrew tradition. Let me remind you of some of the images that we saw in part 1. As you can recall, these are the musicians that were deported from Israel during the captivity under the Babylonians. If you take a good look at their hair, you can see it is in locks. And this is a close-up of those same Hebrews. So when I went looking for our people in Africa, one of the main things that I looked for was the style of their hair, the shape of their face, and whether or not they had beards. These are another of a group of Africans that are from the Shemitic stock. Many times people have said, my grandmother was an Indian. That's one of the old fables that has been passed down to our people from the days of slavery even to this day. You ask many people, and they will tell you, my grandmother was an Indian. Well, consider this. If your grandmother was an Indian, then there must have been millions of black people having sex with millions of Indians, because just about anybody who has any kind of grade of hair better than our normal grade, anybody who has any kind of facial features a little bit sharper and more refined than our normal features, anybody who has any kind of lighted skin or browned skin compared to being dark skinned will tell you my grandmother was an Indian. Well, look at these Shemitic Africans. These are Hebrew Africans. This is the way we look naturally. Back in the 1930s, there was no tribe of Indians intermixing with Negroes to produce a half Indian, half Negro grandmother. That's one of our urban legends. That's one of the lies that has been perpetuated over the centuries to explain why we look different than Shemitic Africans. Let me remind you of what Shemitic Africans look like. These are Shemitic Africans as pictured by the Egyptians more than 3,000 years ago. As you can see, their skin is very, very dark. Their hair is very short, and they grow no facial hair, no beards. Let me remind you of what the children of Shem, namely the Hebrews and the Israelites, look like. As you can see, their hair is much longer, they're of a brown complexion, and they grow beards, heavy beards. It is this mixture of Israelites going into Africa and mixing with the Shemitics in the regions that produce the hybrids that you see here in America today. And even though we are mixed with Africans, Hamitic Africans, and even though we are mixed with the Europeans that brought us here, our Hebrewness still shows through, even to the point that when an offspring of a Hebrew and any other people came out, that offspring was always thrown back with the Hebrews. If you was part nigger, you was a whole nigger. If you was 1/8 drop of blood nigger, you are a nigger. So when you see images like this, these are not Africans mixed with Indians. These are not the results of that lie, that story, that fable that has been told to you since you were a child. My grandmother is an Indian. These are the way our people look naturally. These are Hebrew Africans. Notice the shape of their face, oval. Notice their beards. Notice their hair in locks. The next image you'll see is of more Hebrew Africans. And even though these Hebrews are very dark-skinned, you will notice that their hair is extremely intricate. It is not the short Hamitic hair. It is the long Shemitic hair. Extremely intricate. If our people allow themselves to let their hair grow, then they can do all the intricate things that these Africans, Hebrew Africans, did with their hair. These are not weaves. These are not tracks. These are not the results of hot combing and blowing away your head that you had naturally. This is how your hair could look and should look because you are of the children of Israel. As shown earlier, 1831, the shot of the king / high priest wearing the mitred head wrap and the breastplate. As you can see, he is obviously mixed with Ham. But as I said before, whenever a Hebrew mixed with anybody, that Hebrew was thrown back with the Hebrews. It happened in Egypt. It happened in Syria. It happened in Babylon. It happened in America. Whenever anybody from another nation mixed with the Hebrews, that offspring was considered a Hebrew. The images you're about to see now are very, very modern. These are images of the Falasha. The Falasha are those who were considered outcasts amongst the quote-unquote Africans. These are the Hebrews. These are the children of Israel that had sojourned into Africa and were not made slaves. There was an operation during the 1960s and the 1970s and into the 1980s called Operation Moses. It was an attempt by the Israeli government, the white Jew government, to bring some true Israelites back into the land to give their claim of recapturing the people of Israel some legitimacy. Because by this time, the whole world knew that the true children of Israel were dark-skinned, kinky-haired people. Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, who was assassinated, once said of the Israelis, "How is it that you went away black and came back white. He was assassinated. He was the last true Egyptian president of the Arab Republic of Egypt, as it is today. Mubarak and all of those who are seeking power in Egypt today are not the true children of Mitzrayim, not the true children of Egypt. They are Arabs. They are themselves the descendants of some of the children of Abraham. This image also is of the Falasha that were allowed to return to the Jewish state of Israel during the 1960s and the 1970s. As you can see, they look exactly like you and I, the captives that were brought here to America. More of the so-called Falasha. Falasha is a term used by other Africans, Hamitic Africans, meaning outsider. And this term was applied to us because in Africa we were considered outsiders. We are not the indigenous Hamitic people that first populated the continent. We are refugees that went into that land to escape the barbarism and the captivities of the Assyrians, of the Babylonians, and of all the consequent peoples who conquered the land of Israel, including the Greeks and the Romans. These Falasha escaped the Atlantic slave trade and lived in relative peace, even though during the 1930s, the Italians under Mussolini tried to destroy their country and make it an Italian colony. They finally were allowed to return to the land of Israel under the Jewish occupation. So even though they escaped the Atlantic slave trade, they did not escape the wrath of the Most High, because these same Falasha were driven into the Sudan by the Hamites, known as the Somalians. These same Hebrews are now suffering tremendous hardship in the Sudan as a result of their disobedience to the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. The image you see here is one of what our people still look like today. And as you notice, we have not changed over those thousands and thousands of years, even though some of us have been mixed with the children of Ham, some of us have been mixed with the children of Japhet. Basically, we are exactly the same people that went into Egypt, because even when we went into Egypt, as the scriptures say, we were a speckled bird. Light skin, dark skin, brown skin, high yellow, dark yellow, paper bag brown, all of that. Hebrews in the land today. These Falasha look like the children next door, the ghetto children. You notice the sister has the tattoos on her face. It's an abomination to the Most High. This is why we went into captivity in the first place, because we did not want to follow the law, statutes, and commandments of our Creator. We wanted to follow the fashions of the world. And tattoos is one of the greatest fashions, one of the greatest abominations that our people now suffer and have suffered over the years, because thus saith Yah, you will make no marks, no tattoos, no engravings in your skin, for you are a Quados people, a sacred people. We did it anyway. And we went into the captivity, and this sister went into the hardships that all sisters that decide to disobey the laws of the Most High will endure. You may see this sister in your neighborhood. You may see this sister at the festival. She is an Israelite. She is an abomination because she decided not to follow the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. What is the result of us not following the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High that we swore we would follow? When we came out of the land of Egypt, we swore we would follow everything that the Almighty said we shall do. We said we will do, but we didn't do it. And the whole Old Testament is a testimony to the fact that we did not do it. The Almighty kept His promise that He would destroy us if we did not, that He would punish us for a long, long time if we did not. Now it's time for us to keep our promise, because if we do not keep our promise, then our condition will not change. This is what happened to us. And in part 3, we will talk about what happened in the Atlantic slave trade. Part 3 will deal with how the children of Israel came to be slaves in America. This will deal with the people who took us into captivity. This will deal with the lands that we went to and how the curse followed us to this land as it is this day. This will be part 3 of how the children of Israel came to be slaves in America. How the children of Israel came to be refugees in Africa and images of the true children of Israel. I look forward to you coming back for part 3. Shalom.